My company sold for $6.2 million, and I told absolutely no one. Not my mother, not my sister, not a single person who shared my last name. There was only one exception, and she was the last person any of them would have ever expected. Before I signed a single transfer document or moved a single dollar into my personal accounts, I needed to know the truth about the people I had spent my entire life trying to earn love from. So I ran one final test. What happened over the next 6 weeks changed everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and what it actually means to be someone's person. My name is Claire. I am 31 years old, and for the past 4 years I have been working as a bookkeeper at a mid-sized logistics company in Cincinnati while quietly building a personal finance app on nights and weekends. Everyone in my family thought it was a joke. My mother called it my little hobby. My sister called it embarrassing. My brother told me at Christmas dinner 2 years ago that I was wasting my youth staring at a laptop screen when I could be building a real career. Nobody in my family believed a single thing I ever touched could amount to anything significant. They were wrong. 8 months ago, a venture-backed fintech company approached me about an acquisition. By March, the deal was done. $6.2 million, wire transferred in full into a corporate holding account I had set up under an LLC my attorney created specifically for this purpose. The money was mine, completely and legally. But before I let a single person know, I needed to understand something I had been quietly wondering my entire adult life. Would my family catch me if I was genuinely falling? I had lived in the same one-bedroom apartment for 3 years. I told my mother I had received a certified letter from my landlord stating the building had been sold to a development company. The new owners were clearing out all tenants. I had 30 days to vacate, and every apartment I had toured required a $1,200 security deposit I did not have because I had just paid down a credit card balance. I kept my voice low and slightly shaky when I called, just the right amount of controlled distress. I told her I was not asking for much. Just a small loan to cover the deposit so I did not end up sleeping in my car. My mother let me finish speaking. There was a long pause on the other end, the kind of pause that stretches out like taffy until it breaks. "Claire," she finally said, her tone carrying exactly the flavor of mild annoyance she reserved for when I interrupted her schedule. "I am in the middle of coordinating Brooke's charity gala seating arrangements right now and I simply cannot deal with this today. You are 31 years old. Figure it out. Honestly, if you had just taken the position at your uncle's firm when I arranged it for you 4 years ago, instead of playing around with that silly little app, you would not be in this situation." She did not ask which neighborhood I had been looking at. She did not ask if I was okay. She did not offer to call me back after the seating arrangements. She simply redirected the conversation to my sister's upcoming event and waited for me to agree with her logic and hang up. I called my sister next. Brooke is 2 years older than me, and she has always been exactly what my mother wanted me to be. She runs her own interior design studio, drives a car that costs more than most people's annual salaries, and has never in her life let anyone forget how successful she is. She picked up on the second ring, which surprised me until I realized she was about to leave for a client consultation and was already halfway out the door. "You need $1,200? Brooke repeated, and I could hear the eye roll in her voice even through the phone. "Claire, I have $40,000 tied up in custom furniture orders for a single client right now. I cannot just pull $1,200 out of the air for your rent deposit. This is why I have always said you need an emergency fund. It is basic adulting." She told me to check with the local housing authority about emergency rental assistance programs. Then she told me she had to go. She did not ask when I needed the money. She did not ask how I was holding up emotionally. She treated a phone call from her younger sister facing homelessness the same way she would treat a spam email, something to be quickly dismissed and forgotten. I sat in my car in the parking lot of a coffee shop for about 20 minutes after hanging up. Not because I was upset, but because I was stunned by how easy it had been to get my answer. I had not even had to try very hard. The performance had barely begun, and they had already handed me exactly what I needed to know. I almost put my phone away. Almost. Instead, I opened my contacts and scrolled to a name I almost never called directly. My sister-in-law, Rachel. Rachel had been married to my brother Derek for 6 years. She taught 10th grade art at a public high school about 90 minutes outside the city. She was quiet and careful around our family, always slightly on edge at gatherings, always the first to offer to help clean up and the last to sit down and eat. I had never thought too much about it. I assumed she was just shy. I called her because I felt like I should at least complete the exercise. I did not actually expect anything to come of it. She answered on the third ring. I gave her the same story I had given my mother and my sister. Rachel went completely silent for a moment. Then she said, "Which part of town is the building in? I want to know how far the apartments you toured were from your office." I gave her a neighborhood name. She asked me two more logistical questions. Then she told me she was going to call me back in 15 minutes. She called back in 11. "I have $460 in my checking account right now," she said, speaking quickly and clearly. "My next paycheck hits Thursday. There is a branch of your bank 2 miles from my house, and I can pull the cash out in the morning before school. I can also put the rest on my credit card if you need me to. I know it is not enough to cover the full deposit on its own, but if we split it between cash and the card, it might work. Do you want me to drive it out to you after school tomorrow, or would it be faster if I just transferred what I have right now?" I could hear her doing mental math in real time, quietly rearranging her own budget to make room for me. She was not performing generosity. She was solving a problem. I told her not to worry about it. I told her something had worked out. I used the same kind of vague reassurance you use when you want someone to stand down without making them feel foolish for having mobilized. She did not push. She just said, "Okay, but text me tonight so I know you are all right. I hate thinking about you stressed out over something like this." That was the moment the test was officially over, and that was the moment I understood for the first time just how deeply wrong things were in my brother's house. I had a conversation with Rachel about a week later, over coffee, just the two of us. I steered it carefully, asking questions about her life in a way that I hoped felt natural. How were things at school? Whether she was happy with the house they had bought? Whether she and Derek ever talked about traveling? What came out over the next hour was not what I expected. Derek controlled every dollar that came into their household. Rachel's teaching salary went directly into a joint account that only he could access online. She had a separate checking account for what he called her personal spending, and he deposited a flat amount into it twice a month. The amount had not changed in 4 years, even as their expenses had gone up and her cost of living had increased. When she needed something outside of her standard budget, a car repair, a medical copay, a birthday gift for her own mother, she had to ask him, explain the expense in detail, and wait for his approval. Sometimes he said yes. Sometimes he said it was unnecessary and moved on. She said all of this carefully, with the practiced neutrality of someone who has rehearsed the story so many times it no longer sounds alarming even to herself. I drove home from that coffee meeting and sat in my apartment for a very long time. My brother made a very good living. He was a senior project manager for a commercial real estate development firm, and he had been promoted twice in 3 years. There was absolutely no financial reason for Rachel to be rationing grocery runs or calculating whether a $60 car repair was worth bringing up. The control was not about money. It was about power. It was about keeping her small. The annual family gathering at my mother's house happened every year in late June, on the weekend closest to my mother's birthday. My mother referred to it as a summer dinner, but what it actually was a performance. She spent 6 weeks preparing for it. She rented extra folding tables, hired a woman from her church to help with the food, ordered a custom cake from the bakery she had used for 30 years, and distributed a printed seating chart 2 days in advance. I showed up in a clean but unremarkable sundress and flat sandals, looking exactly like the financially precarious younger daughter she expected to see. I had gone out of my way to make sure nothing about my appearance suggested anything had changed. Rachel was in the kitchen when I arrived, standing over the stove with an apron tied around her waist, stirring a pot of potato salad with the quiet efficiency of someone who has been doing the unglamorous work for so long they no longer notice the unfairness of it. Brooke was on the back patio with a glass of white wine, laughing at something her boyfriend had said. Derek was in the living room talking loudly about a deal he had just closed. My mother was walking around directing traffic and accepting compliments on the centerpieces she had arranged herself. Nobody had thought to ask Rachel if she needed a hand. I walked into the kitchen and started peeling carrots without being asked. Rachel looked at me with genuine warmth, the kind you cannot manufacture. You don't have to do that, she said. I know, I said. I want to. We worked side by side for a while without talking much. It was comfortable in a way that time with my own family rarely was. Dinner was served around 7. My mother sat at the head of the table. My sister sat to her right, wearing a dress I recognized from a boutique that charged more for a blouse than I paid for a month of groceries. Rachel sat at the far end near the kitchen, close enough to get up easily if something needed to be refilled. The conversation moved the way it always did at these dinners, circling gradually toward the subject of success and who had enough of it. Brooke talked about a new client whose entire townhouse she was redesigning from the ground up. Derek talked about a mixed-use development his company was breaking ground on in the fall. My mother listened to both of them with unconcealed pride, nodding and asking follow-up questions that made it clear she had been tracking their careers the way a portfolio manager tracks stocks. Then the conversation turned to me. Brooke mentioned, almost as an aside, that she had heard from a mutual friend that I was still at the same bookkeeping job. She said it the way people say things they want to sting without appearing to try. It is steady work, I said. My mother tilted her head slightly and set down her fork. Claire, I love you, but I need you to hear something I have been thinking about for a while now. You are 31. Your father and I paid for a good education. You have every tool you need to build something real. But instead, you have spent the last 4 years doing entry-level accounting for a company you have no ownership stake in and pouring whatever energy you have left into that app project that never went anywhere. At some point, you have to ask yourself whether the path you are on is actually working. The app never went anywhere, I repeated. She nodded. You know what I mean. I kept my face very still. Derek leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms in the comfortable way of someone who feels entirely at home delivering verdicts. You know what your problem is, Claire? You never learned how to think practically. Mom and Dad gave you every advantage and you turned them into hobbies. I built my career by showing up, doing the unglamorous work, and making strategic decisions. You cannot code your way into financial stability. Real money comes from real industries. Rachel was very quiet at the end of the table. She had been quiet through most of dinner, contributing small things to small conversational threads, and then letting them go. But I noticed she was watching me carefully, and I noticed she had barely touched her food. After dinner, while Brooke and my mother were in the living room with their wine and Derek was outside on the phone, I found Rachel in the kitchen alone, washing dishes by hand even though my mother owned a perfectly functional dishwasher. You do not have to do this either, I said. She smiled at me without turning around. I know. I leaned against the counter and looked at her. Rachel, I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to be honest with me. She turned around then. Is Derek getting worse? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, It goes in phases. He is usually better in the summer. I did not ask what worse meant specifically. I did not need to. The circles under her eyes said enough. The way she flinched at the sound of the back door opening said the rest. I told her I had something to handle but that I wanted to talk more soon. I held her gaze long enough for her to understand I meant it. Then I went home and called my attorney. I had retained Marcus the previous year to handle the acquisition paperwork. He was in his mid-50s, methodical, and completely unsentimental about the things people did to each other when money was involved. I told him what I needed. I gave him 3 names. I told him to find out everything there was to find. He called me 10 days later. He asked me to come in person. I sat in his office on a Tuesday morning and opened the first folder he placed in front of me. It contained a comprehensive financial picture of my sister's design studio. Brooke had not landed a major client in 14 months. The business account for her studio carried a balance that should have been alarming to anyone paying attention, and it would have been, except that Brooke had been moving money between accounts in a pattern that obscured the actual trajectory. She had 3 personal credit cards with combined balances over $180,000. The boutique car she drove was 6 weeks from repossession. She owed her studio's landlord 4 months of back rent, and the landlord had filed a formal notice in small claims court. I thought about the way she had dismissed my request for $1,200 as though I had asked her to solve a word problem she considered beneath her intelligence. The second folder was about Derek. What Marcus had found was not immediately visible from the outside, because Derek was careful, and because the people most affected by it, namely Rachel, had no access to the documentation that would have made the pattern legible. Over 4 years, Derek had quietly redirected a portion of the household income into a personal investment account that Rachel did not know existed. He had done this incrementally, small enough amounts at first that it would not register as a dramatic change, but consistent enough that it had accumulated into something substantial. He had also, in the most recent 18 months, taken out a personal line of credit against a property they jointly owned, without Rachel's knowledge or consent. Her signature on the paperwork was there. It was not her signature. My hands were very steady when I set that folder down, which surprised me. Marcus saved the last folder for the end. My mother had, 3 years earlier, entered into a private agreement with a small property management company co-owned by Brooke. The arrangement was structured as a consulting contract, but the actual transfer of money looked nothing like a consulting engagement. It looked like a sustained financial gift, structured to avoid gift tax reporting thresholds, paid out in increments over 30 months. The total amount was substantial. My mother had been quietly funding Brooke's lifestyle in a way that kept Brooke's fraud from becoming visible to anyone who might look too closely. My father had left a will. The will specified that the family home, which my parents had purchased together and paid off together, was to be held in a trust to be divided equally among his 3 children upon my mother's death. My mother had not contested the will, but she had, 2 years after my father died, transferred sole ownership of the house into her own name using a legal mechanism her personal attorney had arranged for her. The trust no longer existed. The house was entirely hers to do whatever she chose with it. She had chosen to put it up as collateral for a home equity line of credit that was currently funding Brooke's debt management strategy. I sat with all of that information for a long time. I had not walked into Marcus's office hoping to find ammunition. What I had hoped was to find nothing, to discover that my family was simply cold, and that coldness was the full extent of the damage. What I found instead was that the coldness was just the surface, and under the surface was something much more deliberate and much more calculated. I drove home and called Rachel from my car. "I need you to do something for me," I said. "I need you to call in sick tomorrow. I need you to pack a bag tonight with enough for a week. Put it somewhere Derek will not notice it, and I need you to text me when he leaves for work in the morning." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Claire, what is happening?" "I will explain everything tomorrow. Do you trust me?" Another pause. Then, "Yes." She texted me at 7:48 the next morning. I was already in my car. I drove to her neighborhood and picked her up from a gas station 2 blocks from the house. She was standing next to a medium-sized duffel bag in a light jacket, squinting slightly in the morning sun, looking like she had not slept. I took her to a hotel downtown. Not a budget property, not a chain with a loyalty program. A real hotel. The kind with a rooftop restaurant and towels that felt like they had been manufactured specifically to make you feel like a person again. I booked a suite for the week under my LLC's corporate account. She stood in the middle of the room looking at the skyline view for about 30 seconds without speaking. Then she turned around and said, "Claire, please tell me what is going on." I sat down in one of the chairs by the window and told her everything. I told her about the app. I told her about the acquisition. I told her about the test I had run and what it had revealed and why I had done it. I told her what Marcus had found in Derek's finances, and what the forged signature meant, and what options she had. She sat down very slowly in the other chair while I was talking. By the time I finished, she had not said anything for almost 4 minutes. Finally, she said, "How long has he been doing it?" "At least 4 years that we can document cleanly," I said. She exhaled very slowly through her nose. "You knew I could not leave," she said. "You knew I had nowhere to go and no money of my own, and that is why you did all of this first." "That is why I did all of this first," I confirmed. She looked out the window for a long time. My mother's summer birthday dinner fell on a Saturday that year. I had RSVP'd yes in April, and I had no intention of changing that. I had spent the weeks between Rachel's departure and the dinner making certain preparations that I will get to in a moment. But outwardly, I had done nothing that would signal to anyone in my family that anything had changed. I showed up in a familiar car wearing familiar clothes and carrying a bottle of wine that cost $9. My mother met me at the door with the particular expression she reserved for slightly disappointing events, something between tolerance and muted resignation. The dinner was smaller this year. It was just the family. My mother, Brooke and her boyfriend, Derek, and me. Rachel had told Derek she was visiting a sick friend in Columbus. He had not asked for details. He was not the kind of husband who asked for details when they were inconvenient. Derek spent most of the first hour talking about himself. He talked about a contract negotiation he had handled. He talked about a vehicle he was considering purchasing. He talked about a home renovation he was planning for the fall, at which point Brooke perked up and offered her studio's services at a family discount, and their mother looked between them the way she always did, with the satisfied expression of a woman whose investments were performing exactly as intended. At some point during the main course, Derek turned to me. "Still at the bookkeeping job?" he asked. It was not really a question. "Still figuring things out," I said. Familiar answer. He seemed satisfied with it. Brooke set down her fork. "Mom mentioned you had some kind of housing situation earlier this year. Landlord selling the building?" She shook her head with a slight smile. "You really do need to start thinking about building equity, Claire. Renting forever is just throwing money away." I looked at my sister. I noticed the watch she was wearing, the same watch she had posted on her studio's Instagram account 4 months ago, captioned with a client gift, apparently from a grateful homeowner. I wondered if that homeowner knew the gift had been charged to a credit card that was currently being managed by making the minimum payment on a second card. I took a sip of my wine. My mother cleared her throat. "I have been meaning to talk to all of you about something." She reached behind her chair to the small sideboard against the dining room wall and produced a manila envelope. She placed it on the table and folded her hands on top of it. "As you know, I have been talking with my attorney about estate planning. Given everything that has happened in the past few years, I want to make sure my assets are properly protected. I have made some adjustments to my will." Derek leaned forward slightly. He did it in a way that he probably thought was casual. "Nothing dramatic," my mother continued. "But I did want you both to know that the house, because it is now entirely in my name, will be handled differently than your father originally outlined. Brooke has been an enormous support to me over the past several years, and I want that reflected in how things are structured." I watched Derek's jaw tighten fractionally. He was doing math. I looked at Brooke. She was nodding with an expression of performed humility that did not quite reach her eyes. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice completely level, "before you finalize anything with your attorney, there is some information you should probably have." My mother looked at me with polite impatience. "What kind of information?" I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. It was not theatrical. I simply set it on the table next to the breadbasket and opened the cover. I had printed a selection of documents. The credit card statements were on top, organized by account and highlighted to show the running balances. Beneath those were the small claims court filing from Brooke's landlord, the car lease delinquency notice, and a single-page summary Marcus had prepared showing the total debt picture in plain language. "These are Brooke's current financials," I said to my mother. Brooke made a sharp sound that was not quite a word. My mother looked at the papers the way you look at something you recognize before you have had time to decide what to do with the recognition. Her expression shifted in a way I had never seen it shift before. "Where did you get those?" Brooke demanded. "I have been paying a corporate attorney," I said. "That is a private," Brooke started. "I know," I said. I looked at my mother. "The house you were planning to leave her is already collateral on a line of credit, Mom. Your attorney should know that before you restructure anything." The table was very quiet. I pulled the second folder out and set it in front of Derek. He looked at it. He did not open it. "Those are Rachel's payroll records, cross-referenced against your joint account deposits for the past 4 years, I said. "There is also documentation of the personal line of credit you took out against the Oakfield property without her knowledge, and a certification from a handwriting analyst regarding the signatures on the application." Derek's face went very still. The dinner party version of him, the confident, loud man who filled rooms with the sound of his own authority, went very quiet very fast. My mother looked at him. "Derek." He did not respond. "Did you forge your wife's signature on a loan document?" she asked. The quality of the silence in the room changed. "Mom," Derek started. "Yes or no," she said. I had never heard her use that tone with him. In 31 years, I had never once heard my mother speak to Derek in a way that required an accounting. He looked down at the folder. He did not answer. I reached back into my bag one final time. I set a single printed document on the table in front of my mother. It was a certified letter from a property law firm, sent to the house, addressed to her. It had arrived at her address 6 weeks ago. She had never seen it. "Your equity line is in default," I told her. "You have been making payments on the interest, but the principal balance has not moved." The property management consulting payments to Brooks Studio made up the difference for a while, but those stopped 4 months ago, when Brooks' Studio account ran out of runway. The bank sent this letter in April. My mother picked up the letter. She read the first paragraph. I watched her face. She set the letter down very carefully, as if she were afraid of the table. "The house," I said, "which you took out of the trust that Dad set up, and which you used as collateral for a line of credit that was spent supporting Brooks' debt cycle, is currently 32 days from a formal foreclosure initiation." Brooks' chair scraped back. "That is not," she started. Then she stopped. "It is all in the folder," I said to her. "I am not making any of it up." Derek pushed back from the table and stood up. His voice, when it came out, was controlled in a way that sounded like it required significant effort. "Whatever you think you are doing right now, Claire." "I am not doing anything to you, Derek," I said. "You did this. I just turned the lights on." He walked toward the back door. My mother called his name. He did not stop. Brooke looked at the credit card statements with the expression of someone watching a car accident they are somehow also inside of. She had spent years performing wealth with such consistency that I wondered if she had started to believe the performance herself. "Mom," she finally said, "it is not as bad as it looks." "Your car has a repossession order on it, Brooke," I said. "The landlord for your studio has a court filing. You have been using our mother's house as a float for your business debt for 3 years. It is exactly as bad as it looks." My mother sat very still at the head of the table. She looked older in that moment than she had looked in years. She turned to me. "And what exactly is it that you want, Claire?" she asked. "You come in here with all of this information, and what is the endgame? Do you want money? Do you want an apology?" I was very careful with my answer. I did not raise my voice. I had not raised my voice once during the entire conversation. "I do not want anything from you," I said. "I wanted you to have the truth before you signed legal documents based on a fiction that your attorney does not know is a fiction. That is all." She looked at me for a long time. "You have always been like this," she said. "Always waiting for the moment to make yourself feel right." I thought about the phone call I had made to her from my car in the parking lot outside that coffee shop, my voice careful and slightly shaky, asking for $1,200. I thought about the long pause before she told me to figure it out. I thought about the way she had redirected the conversation to Brooks' gala and waited for me to hang up. "You know what I remember, Mom?" I said quietly. "I called you this spring. I told you I was about to lose my apartment. I asked for $1,200. You told me my situation was the result of my own choices. You told me to figure it out. And then you went back to planning Brooks' event." She looked at me steadily. "Your situation is the result of your own choices," I said. "I hope you can figure it out." I stood up from the table, picked up my folders, and walked out of the dining room. Derek's car was already gone from the driveway. I got into my car, pulled out of my mother's neighborhood, and drove downtown. Rachel was in the hotel suite when I arrived. She was sitting at the desk with her laptop open, research tabs scattered across the browser, the focused energy of someone who has finally been given permission to plan a future. She had spent the past 2 weeks meeting with a family law attorney I had retained on her behalf. She had spent several evenings talking through the documentation Marcus had prepared. She knew exactly what Derek had taken, and she knew exactly what she was entitled to. She looked up when I walked in. "How did it go?" I set the folders on the table and sat down across from her. "It went the way it needed to go," I said. She nodded slowly. She had stopped asking me if I was sure about things. She had come to understand that I was sure. "I have something I want to give you," I said. I pushed a flat envelope across the desk. She opened it. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a property deed for a condominium in a building 6 blocks from the hospital where she had always wanted to apply for an art therapy position. The condo had 2 bedrooms, a west-facing balcony, and a parking spot that was included in the title. I had purchased it through the LLC 6 weeks earlier and transferred it into her name the previous Thursday. The second document was from a private banking institution. It confirmed the establishment of an independent savings account in Rachel's name with an opening balance that would take a person making a teacher's salary over a decade to accumulate. There were no conditions attached to it. It was not a loan. It was not contingent on anything. It was simply hers. She read both documents twice. She did not say anything for a while. When she finally looked up, her eyes were bright in the way that comes right before tears. "I do not understand why you are doing this," she said. "You drove to my apartment in February with your last paycheck because I texted you that I was having a hard week," I said. "Do you remember that?" She remembered. "You brought me soup in a mason jar and you sat on my kitchen floor with me for 2 hours while I talked about nothing important. You were not my closest friend. You were not even someone I had spent a lot of time with. You were just someone who noticed that I was struggling and decided that mattered." She looked at the documents in her hands. "Derek took 4 years of your income," I said. "He took your financial independence. He made you ask permission to buy your own groceries. And the family that was supposed to protect you from that was too busy using each other to notice it was happening." I noticed. "And I am sorry it took me this long." She pressed her hand over her mouth for a moment. Then we sat like that for a while, watching the city lights come on as the sky went dark. 6 months later, Rachel started her new position at the hospital 2 blocks from her condo. She runs the art therapy program for pediatric patients 3 days a week, and she teaches a continuing education class on Saturdays. She told me recently that she had forgotten what it felt like to make a decision without calculating how someone else would react to it first. She is still learning how to spend money without guilt, but she is getting better at it. Derek's forgery case was referred to a civil attorney by Rachel's legal team. The divorce settlement took 4 months to finalize. He walked away with considerably less than he had been counting on. Brooke is working at a different firm now, a smaller one, doing actual project management rather than running her own studio. The boutique car was picked up by the repossession company from a parking garage the morning after the dinner. She has not spoken to me directly, but she posted something on social media 3 weeks ago about learning what really matters, which I took as a version of a message. My mother kept the house. Marcus negotiated a restructuring of the loan terms with the bank, which bought her time. She is aware that I was involved in that negotiation. She has not said thank you. We talk occasionally, briefly, about nothing complicated. It is not a warm relationship. It is probably the most honest one we have ever had. The app continues to perform well under the acquiring company's management. I am 3 months into development on the second project, something I have wanted to build for 2 years, but never had the time or resources to attempt. It is going well. I still drive the same car. I still live in a rented apartment, though a different one now, a nicer one, with a second bedroom I use as an office. I have not made a performance of anything. The thing I keep coming back to, when I think about everything that happened, is how simple the whole test was. I asked 3 people for help with something small. 2 of them found a way to tell me my problem was my own fault. One of them reconfigured her entire week to solve it. Real family is not the people who share your last name. Real family is the person standing outside a gas station at 7:48 in the morning with a duffel bag, trusting you even when they do not fully understand what is happening yet. I found mine. It took me 31 years and a company acquisition and a really good attorney, but I found her. If you have ever had a moment where someone outside your family showed up for you in a way your own blood never did, I want to hear about it in the comments below. Drop your story. I read every single one. And if this resonated with you, please subscribe to Recovery Stories because there are more of these coming, and they are all true.